Welcome to the France 24 debate. I'm Mark Owen. Two female journalists are on trial in Iran. They face charges of spying and working for foreign intelligence. Their crime could perhaps best be described here in the West as a good old-fashioned journalistic coup, a scoop. They revealed the truth about a story and dared to publish it. The story was the death in police custody of a 22-year-old Kurdish woman, she, of course, Mahsa Amini, who'd been arrested over a headscarf, having fallen foul of the so-called fashion police in Iran, who enforce strict laws on the wearing of headscarves. The Islamic Republic of Iran denies that Mahsa Amini's death was suspicious, denies that she was ill-treated, denies that she was beaten by a number of male police officers. There are eyewitnesses that testify that this was the case. Mahsa's death in September ignited protest that continues in Iran to this day. Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, the United Nations, all raising questions over Mahsa Amini's death in police custody. Let's bring you our panel who are going to discuss all of the issues relating not just to Mahsa's death, but broadening things out across Iran right now, which is a country really feeling an amount of chaos. Here in the studio, Shoura Makaremi, who's an anthropologist. Great to see you. Thank you very much for joining us. On the other side of the studio, Barbad Golshiri, artist and activist. Barbad, thanks for coming into the studio.
I appreciate the invitation. Thank you.
Joining us by Skype is Pula Ali Markham, historian at the MIT. Pua, thank you very much for being with us. And joining us by Skype from London, Tara Kangalu, global affairs journalist, author of The Heartbeat of Iran, and adjunct professor at Georgetown University. Thank you for being with us too. Before I let the panel loose, let's bring you a scene-setting report from James Vassner here at France 24.
If it wasn't for them, Mahsa Amini's death may not have received worldwide attention. Arrested for allegedly violating Iran's Islamic dress code, Mahsa Amini was held by the country's morality police in September and died in their custody 3 days later. Niloufar Hamidi, who works for the reformist Sharq newspaper, broke the news of her death via Twitter, snapping this photograph of Amini's parents in the hospital. Meanwhile, Elahe Mohammadi from the Hamihan newspaper later travelled to the funeral in the student's Kurdish hometown, which turned into a protest. Iran's intelligence ministry claims the two journalists had been working for the CIA. Both are accused of propaganda against the Islamic Republic and conspiring against national security. Two charges that potentially carry the death penalty as they undergo separate trials behind closed doors in Tehran. Iran has ignored all calls by rights groups for a public trial.
James Vassner reporting there. Last time that I personally was in this position on the debate talking about this particular story, I was accused by a guest we had joining us from Tehran that I was making it up. There we go. But I think we know what the situation really is. Let's bring in our first guest, Shoura Makaremi, anthropologist. Thank you for coming in to see us. We have a situation where these two reporters, Niloufar Hamidi and Elahe Mohammadi, are basically facing possibly a death penalty for doing their job. It's inconceivable, but this is the situation.
Yes, absolutely. So the spectacle of terror had started since late fall. And in the first stage of the insurrections, the repression has not been so harsh as, let's say, in 2019, during November 2019, where hundreds of people have been killed in just a few days. But this time, the repression was in different stages, and it seems that the security state has set its own temporality by backlashing a little bit afterwards and starting those trials and condemnation to death of protesters as a way to really put on stage a spectacle of terror in order to infuse fear among the population.
Protest groups in Iran send me via the mobile phone images of what is going on. And frankly, it is remarkable how this has expanded from the very concentrated protest over the death of Mahsa Amini and how she was treated to something bigger.
Absolutely, and since the very start, with the slogan "Jinjan Azadi," women, life, freedom, it was quite clear that it was not a movement against compulsory hijab, the forced veil. It was a movement for freedom and for a regime change, and this was the big difference. With this movement, where all the margins, all the different fringes of the Iranian society came together with the same demand. And this is really where a political movement comes behind insurrectional movements.
Thank you very much indeed, Shira. Barbara, can I bring you in? Barbara Golshiri, artist, activist, in that order, I'm not sure, but you'll tell us how you stand, and I know you'll express yourself very clearly. In terms of what we're seeing here, I mean, I can't get over the fact that two people who do my job are facing possibly the death penalty. I find it incredibly shocking.
It is shocking, but there is nothing new under the sun of the Islamic Republic, to borrow the ecclesiastical phrase. But this particular judge, he's a descendant of Khalkhali, the notorious hanging judge. He himself is a hanging judge. So back in 2009, during the Green Movement, we had this Stalinist show trial with tens or perhaps hundreds of political prisoners. And so there was this young man who was told, confess and we will set you free. He confessed and they executed him. So when it comes to Judge Salavati, things are different. First of all, it's not an open court. It's not a judiciary court. It's a revolutionary court. And revolutionary courts are illegal even by the Constitution of the Islamic Republic. I do not say that. Prominent lawyers said that. Nasrin Sotoudeh, Mohammad Saifzadeh. They said that. And so the trial should have happened not behind closed doors, and that is what happened. And what I was told, I have friends and colleagues there in front of the prison, the court, who said that the lawyers couldn't speak, that the judge did not let them speak, and they didn't let the family to attend the trial. So we are facing a sham trial, a kangaroo court. You know, it's nothing that any reasonable person who's in his or her right mind would accept as a court. And when we think in Persian, because we do, in Persian it's called dadgah, the place and time for justice. So in Persian we call it bidadgah, that the place and time for all the injustices that can happen in a so-called court. And this judge stands uppermost. He is autonomous, not in the sense of Montesquieu of separation of powers. I'm not talking about spirit of laws. I'm talking about that he is autonomous, that he can decide whatever he wants. And lawyers, he hates lawyers personally. He hates the system.
So this is an arbitrary system of justice, basically, where one man will decide the fate of these two journalists.
I think the decisions were made ages ago, when the IRGC and the Ministry of Intelligence issued an announcement saying that they were in touch with a hostile government, namely the United States. And so what are we dealing with? Espionage? No. Publishing a photo of the parents hugging each other and writing this beautiful sentence. I want to remind our audience that the father of Mahsa Amini, I insist on her Kurdish name because some have begun to forget it, that our black raiments will be our flags. And that happened, not only black raiments, but braids. So, and as Shura wisely put it, it's not an anti-government, it wasn't an anti-government revolution or movement. It was an anti-regime revolution, and it's still going on.
Babad, thank you very much indeed. We'll bring you back in a second. Let's bring in our guests who are joining us from afar. First, we'll turn to Pooya Ali Magham, a historian at MIT. Pooya, your sense of the situation. Clearly, as a journalist, I'm shocked and outraged with what's going on, but in a sense, less so because one knows these things go on. There's a couple of journalists now facing a possible death penalty for revealing a story. Clearly, a story that Iran didn't want to be published.
Yeah, so the state is trying to demonstrate strength. And I'm reminded of Khosrow Golosorghi and Keramat Daneshyan, who were also journalists in 1974 in the pre-revolutionary days, who were tried in a military tribunal, and their real crime was that they were Marxist-Leninists, and it was also a show trial, also a kangaroo court. They were supposed to confess to whatever crimes they had been accused of, and instead they used the occasion to condemn the state publicly because it was a televised military tribunal, and then they were subsequently executed for that public condemnation of the state. What's happening today, these are also two journalists. They're being, like Daneshyan and Golosorghi, they are civilians, but they're being tried in a revolutionary court. But this time, it's a closed proceeding, really so that these two journalists don't have the opportunity to condemn the state. If they are given that sentence, and if they are condemned to death, like the executions of Golosorghi and Daneshyan, this is not a testament to the strength of the state, but really it's a testament to its brutality, and it will further discredit the state. When Daneshyan and Golosorghi were executed in '74, their pictures were, their placards were raised during the revolutionary uprising in '78, '79. What fate befalls these two journalists won't be the end of the story, and their pictures will be raised in future protests as well.
For now, Pooya, thank you very much indeed. Let's go to Tara Kangalu next, Global Affairs journalist. Tara has frequently joined us here in France 24 to talk about the situation in Iran. And Tara, we always appreciate your input. Give us your sense of the situation.
This story is in particular quite emotional because, we are journalists. And I often think about, what we do to get the story and the scoop and be truth tellers. That's what our profession is all about, to be transparent, factual truth tellers. And the fact that these two young women risked it all with the possibility of now a death sentence to tell the story, to tell the truth of what's going on the ground in Iran, of what's at stake for young women and girls. That's quite telling of not just the brutality and the oppression of the Islamic regime, but the courage and resilience of Iranian people and Iranian women. You have to understand that there are many journalists in Iran today who aspire to do the kind of truth-telling that you and I want to do. But they are doing it against the backdrop of severe censorship, oppression, and quite frankly, brutal crackdown. I mean, we have seen over the last many years, decades, how newspapers and publications and publishers and so on and bookstores have been shut down, journalists, writers, authors, poets, arrested and detained and killed. So this is, quite frankly, is very emotional for me, but also very telling of how much this society desires change and how much they're willing to give to get that change. And I really hope that we don't see a worst case scenario. I've been following this story since day one, and it's quite unfortunate what we're seeing. But these two girls did what they did with the knowledge that they're facing risks. And I also want to add this bit of context, because I think this is important whilst we're talking about these risks. These girls had permission, by the way. These two journalists had permission from their papers to go do the story. So they didn't just go rogue and, do something that wasn't in, compliance with the rules and regulations. First of all, there shouldn't be any rules and regulations when wanting, to do reporting. But even they had permits to do this, which makes this even, more ludicrous.
Tara, you're clearly very upset by this, and it's not the first time that you've spoken to us here and showed that same kind of emotion, because it means a lot to you. We can get that sense completely. And you answered my next question, which was going to be, were they aware of what might happen? Surely they weren't aware that they might end up in this particular situation.
It's interesting. One of the chapters in my book is about a young Iranian man. He's a journalist, and he was a very prominent journalist for Daily at the time, Hamshahri. Since then, he has left. Now he's actually in France because he could no longer take it. He left about 2.5 years ago. And one of the quotes that has always stayed with me in my very long interview with him for the book was that he said, in Iran, journalism is being at an intersection with no lights. So at any point, you might crash, either kill someone or be killed, meaning that doing journalism in Iran is just, the riskiest of professions, because at any moment you might be arrested. At some point, you would be put in prison. Whatever you do may be seen unpermissible at any moment. Because why? This is a regime, this is a government, this is a system that does not want transparency, does not want truth-telling, and does not want reporting on some of the most important issues affecting the society and this country, and would do anything to conceal that and stifle anyone who wants to address these issues.
Tara, thank you very much indeed. A friend of mine worked on the Iranian TV news channel. Didn't last very long because he was acting like an instinctive British journalist, and he was out the door pretty quickly. Shura, can I bring you back in on this one? Tara there outlining the fact that these reporters perhaps knew the risks they were running, but is there a sense that they've been singled out not just because they're reporters, but because they're women?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's telling that the political figures of this movement at every level are women. But what I want to say also is that I'm also very emotional about what is happening, but I also have a lot of hope. And I still think that the situation is giving place for hope for many reasons. And one of the reasons is that actually we have seen insurrections in provinces that were heavily armed. People have very easy access to arms in Kurdistan and in Baluchistan. And they were on the street every day, every Friday, every other day. And they didn't, they fight with cocktail Molotov, with stones, but they never touch an arm. So the situation, so there is this kind of popular wisdom, this kind of collective cleverness of not getting where the regime wants you to go, which is switching into, a kind of a proto-civil war situation. And this is absolutely how the security forces have managed, order throughout the fall, trying to push the movement towards that violence. And it didn't do that. So it shows a level of organization, and it shows a society that is used to be organized at an infra level. So they don't need to have full access to the internet and full access to communication and to be out of jail, all of them, to organize together. So we have a structure of, kind of organization in situation. We have collective knowledge and wisdom of how to navigate insurrection and movement without getting into violence. And we have also the fact that Bobak was referring to the fact that these politics of hanging and killing are the continuation of what has been taking place in the last 40 years. But things are different today, because what these politics did after the 79 revolution was that they engineered the affective life of society towards indifference, and atomization, which happens in totalitarian societies. And they also engineered political and social lives and values towards, a certain kind of prudence, of not being in face-to-face confrontation and antagonism. But here, Iranian society has shifted, because now there is no indifference, but there is empathy. And we saw this empathy with also the last waves of execution of protesters. And there is no going back to a certain way of being, cautious, but it is antagonism that is carried and performed by the protesters. And referring back to what has been said by talking about the discredit of the regime, what is very important is that this reconfiguration of the affective life and the collective values is playing towards a discredit of falling down of the discourse of legitimacy of power. And this is not very old. This is quite new. It's like several years ago that this is happening, and this regime has no legitimacy anymore. So what we are now waiting to see is that when a power loses its discourse of legitimacy and credit, until when can it last and how?
It has lost its legitimacy, I think.
Absolutely.
Definitely, it has. And I can give you an update of what happened outside the court. There was this, because journalists, the confreres of these two good journalists were there. So the civil society activists, and their colleagues, and so the police comes and tells them to disperse. One of them asks, "Is it illegal to stand here?" And the policeman responds with this hideous answer, which has layers of truth in it. He says that you want to help a prisoner, you yourself are a captive. So this is of course heartbreaking, but it has happened a lot in our history. When some of our friends and colleagues are released from prison, we usually say, "Welcome to the bigger prison." So it's
a comment on Iranian society.
Exactly. And it is important to notice that two of these people were arrested. Two female journalists, Zahra and Huda Tawhidi, who were there, and they were pardoned by the supreme leader. But when the state media said that the so-called supreme leader, what is supreme about him, anyhow, has pardoned tens of thousands of prisoners. So some of these prisoners were those who were active during the Women Life Freedom Revolution. And these two journalists, Zahra and Huda Tawhidi, were pardoned by him. So it is illegal to arrest them yet again. And they did that only because they were there, standing outside the court, waiting for the news of their colleagues. What's wrong with that? What's illegal about that? So they want to make examples again and again and again. And this would not work. People are no longer afraid. They killed 1,500 people during the bloody November. They've killed around 600 people during the Women Life Liberty movement. And people are no longer scared. When they go to the streets, when they take to the streets, they know what will happen. So did we during the Green Movement. I was there during the bloody November. We knew that when we go out, we might get killed. But there is no other option. We tried many things. We tried the reforms. We tried many things. Unfortunately, we realized that it's not possible. This regime will not change. It's a holistic system. It considers itself and refers to itself as the sacred system. And it cannot be criticized by subjects like us. So it has to be changed by such subjects.
Babak, I'll pause you for a second. Let's go back to Pooya, who is in California. Pooya Ali Magham, historian at MIT. Pooya, how long can this continue? Because when the protests began, when Mahsa Amini when she died in police custody, one would have thought this wouldn't have lasted for more than a few weeks, but this is continuing night after night after night. We've had a very vivid description of what goes through people's minds when they go to protest. They're fearing for their lives, but still they're going out. How long will this continue, do you think?
So, I was on France 24 in the fall when the protests happened in another really lively discussion like this one. And, we were, all four of the discussants were, we were pessimistic because the population, however committed it is a bit disorganized, and it's facing a very organized, very decisive, repressive apparatus. So I can't give you the likelihood of what's going to happen. But what I can say is all the issues that have existed, none of them have really been addressed by the state. So, the trial of these two journalists speaks to the lack of transparency, accountability, and freedom of speech that continues. And then the other issues like political repression, the militarization of the state, torture, corruption, inflation, gender discrimination, the underdevelopment of places like Sistan, Baluchistan, and Iran's periphery. These issues all exist. So that explosive cocktail that is really what's causing these protests is the amalgamation of all of these issues. They persist and will continue to persist. The Iranian state kind of wants to ignore all these issues and really focus on the economy. It wants an economic solution to Iran's problem, hoping really to buy off the population, right? And so it's not really interested in a political solution. But I think that the political issues and the ones I just listed and the economic issues are all part of what makes Iranians so angry. And they're going to continue and persist. And I think that even if the protests plateau out, they are episodic. They will happen again and again and again because the issues that give rise to these protests are durable, unfortunately.
Do you feel that these two reporters, I put the question to Shora a little earlier, I'll put the same question to you, Puya, singled out because they're women? Do you think they've been treated even more harshly because they're women?
Yes. So I think that women are the incubators of resistance and revolution in this generation of protests. And I'm not talking about the protests in 2022 or 2023. They have been the incubators of resistance. You could go back as far as the uprising in 2009, where the martyr figure was Neda Agha Sultan, who was killed, I think it was June 20th, 2009. And so the state wants to make an example, not just of these Iranian journalists, but Iranian journalists who are women. It's very intentional. It's designed to demobilize not just protests, but revolutionary and activist women. And that actually is kind of what happened in 2009 with the death of Neda Agha Sultan. It was such a dramatic and violent death that it ended up demobilizing not all, but many women, many young women. But I think this generation is a little bit different. The state wants to show that decisiveness, wants to discourage protest, and is specifically targeting these two because these two women have been part of the story from the beginning. I don't know if it's going to have that effect. I do think this generation is a little bit more fearless and angry and desperate for change.
Puya, thank you very much indeed. I think your final remarks there really sum up what Barbad was just saying and your experience, Barbad, of going out to protest and wondering whether you're going to come back, whether you're going to go out and get killed. I mean, it really is a remarkable thing for you to say, and I appreciate you sharing that with us here. Let me bring back in for another comment Tara Kangalu in London, author of Heartbeat of Iran. Tara, correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm sure all of you will correct me if I'm wrong. 142 executions carried out in Iran in May, largest monthly figure since 2015. And of course, among those executed, people who are protesting, I can think of 3 men at least. I'm sure there are others. Is there no limit to what the regime will do to protect itself, Tara?
I think we have seen how far this regime will go to protect its longevity, its existence, and that's reflected in their brutality. And I want to take this opportunity to really call on the international community to hear the Iranian people's voice. I think because by now, we know the extent of the Islamic regime's brutality in doing all it can to maintain its grip on power. But we are also seeing how the international community, in many ways, doesn't walk the walk. You know, they talk the talk, but they don't walk the walk. And in many cases, they've abandoned the Iranian people. I remember how Iranian people were excited back in December when Iran was kicked off of the UN Commission on Women's Rights on women. And just a few weeks ago, we saw how the Iran ambassador to the UN was appointed on the as the chairman of the Human Rights Social Commission. People are watching what the world is doing for the Iranian people, and Iranian people are seeing it. They've seen it over and over again. And I hope the civil society, people who are watching this program, the average French person, average American, average person around the world recognizes how much they have in common with the average Iranian, like Niloufar and Elahe, and understand how their freedom, their livelihood, and them living their life would add value to the international community. And I think that's when we're going to see change, when the world sees Iranian people as equal and understands how much value they have in common with them. And I think that's where we're going to see change, because I'm quite frankly so disappointed in how the world is handling, the Iranian people's cry for change. And in many ways, it appears that they quite frankly want the regime to be in place. But to answer your question, we've seen the brutality of this regime over and over again. And yes, they will do all it takes to stay in power.
Tara, for now, thank you very much indeed. Shura, you wanted to add something?
Yes, absolutely. So Tara said it all, but there is one limit to this brutality. It's the limit that the other states, the other nation states, who have the power in this, international architecture, are setting. And what we see is that the West here is not only a spectator of all this brutality. This is not just, a show for the rest of the world to see. They are also actors. So the Western states are actors. They are negotiating. They are negotiating their hostages against some, they are giving a lot to the Islamic Republic. And they are also withholding their visa policies. So visa policies are very important. Give visa to Iranians who want and who need to go out of the country. Don't block the visas. This is very important. You have a transnational community of Iranians inside and outside the country. Empower this transnational community of Iranians, because Iranian society is transnational. And also, what this Western community is doing by recognizing the Iranian state as so legitimate, and also deblocking their assets and negotiating with them, is actually taking advantage of the weakness of the Iranian regime brought by the fight of the Iranian people, and they are turning their back on the people. So because what is happening, Saudi Arabia, as well as China, as well as the West, they are negotiating with Iran because Iran is in the weak position. Iran only negotiates when it's in a weak position. So this weakness comes from where? It comes from the people who get in the street.
Exactly.
So the Iranian state is becoming weaker because of the insurrections, and the West is using this weakness in order to, have some profits and negotiate, but it doesn't give back anything to that, to their allies, which are the Iranian people. So it's not, a moral duty of the West to help, democracy in the world. It's just, there is objective situation, and you are in a position of power in front of the Islamic Republic because the Iranian people are brave enough.
Let's just remind people of the, last month, high-profile prisoner exchange took place. Olivier van der Castilla, a Belgian citizen, arrested in February 2022 in Tehran. He was convicted of spying, sentenced to 40 years in jail, 74 lashes of the whip as well. He was swapped for the Iranian diplomat Asadollah Assadi. Assadi, convicted of terrorism in Belgium, serving a 20-year sentence. Shortly after this, Iran's President Raisi was in Oman. It was Oman that helped to facilitate the prisoner swap. perhaps signs of Iran trying to make friends on the international stage, or perhaps, as you were saying, Shura, it's a question of looking for friends wherever they can get them?
Absolutely, because the question of getting Iran to the table of negotiation, it only goes there when it's weak. So using this weakness, I think, is a very hypocritical. I'm using this moral term. I know that it has no place in international relations, but yet, the Iranian transnational community was hoping for more, and also putting, the Sepah, the Guardians of the Revolution, on the terrorist list was refused by European Commission on the premises that there is no European court that has identified them as terrorists, which is wrong, because there was a trial in Berlin in the early years 2000 because of murder in the Mykonos restaurant. And in this trial, the Guardians of the Revolution has been, identified as a terrorist organization leading special operation. More than 300 Iranians have been killed abroad by the special operations of Iran.
500.
So we have all the
500.
500.
Abdurrahman Buruman Foundation says more than 500 were assassinated abroad.
This is 500 Iranian citizens
Abroad,
assassinated by.
Absolutely, by a special, operation bureau that comprises the Office of the Supreme Leader, the Minister of Information, and the Sepah, the Guardians of the Revolution.
Yeah, Shapur Bakhtiar here in Paris, Abdurrahman Buruman in Paris.
So we have everything is in the hand, I think, of I'm not talking about the international community because I don't know, how strong it is, but the nation states and the Western states have everything in their hand to act and to condemn those executions. There is a deafening silence today. And we know that, it shows that all lives are not equals. And this is a very, very strong stand, a very strong stand by the Western powers to the international community, to all the societies that are struggling in the world. So I think this should be highlighted as well.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Baba?
I can give an example of what Shura said. A very well-known Iranian journalist, Mahsa Amini. She was arrested. She was in prison. She was in the same prison, Evin prison. Mm-hmm. And when she was released, then she started learning French, translated books, and all she wanted was to come here to France. And she has an uncle here who has a farm, so she wouldn't be a burden on the shoulders of the French government. And the only reason that her visa was refused, she was told at the French consulate that she was a former political prisoner. And by political prisoner, I mean a journalist who was arrested because of telling the truth.
This is a totally Kafkaesque situation.
Yes, it is, and I told about it to Reporters Without Borders. But Reporters Without Borders cannot issue visas. They can't.
They can't.
They cannot. And I've seen these corruptions in all these consulates. Because I only hold an Iranian passport, so I always had to get a visa myself. Mm. If you're wealthy, they willingly give you a visa. But being a former political prisoner, you simply deny her visa because of that for a very well-known Iranian journalist. And we are in her debt because of what she has done, as we are in debt for what Niloufar and Elahe has done for our country and for freedom of speech. To now we can talk about progressive revolution called women life freedom, which goes beyond the compulsory hijab and all that.
Indeed, the issue of freedom of the press, the issue of the right to freedom of speech is certainly something I think many journalists take too lightly. But when you see the situation facing Niloufar and Elahe, it really brings it home that it is important. And the issues that you've raised really, I think, show how important it is that the story gets told. Clearly, what happened to Mahsa Amini was horrific. It's out in the open because of these two women who are now facing what could be could be capital punishment if it goes as far as it might. Let's go back for another comment to Pooya Ali Magam in California, historian at MIT. Pooya, the situation here, I'm not hearing any optimism about things changing. And clearly the situation is that the regime in Iran wants to maintain its position, keep things as they are, and keep the people under the thumb, as much as they're rebelling and trying to sort of put their case forward and protesting as often as they can.
So I think the optimism is found in Iranian history, right? So for about 100 and maybe 40 years, Iranians have demonstrated generation after generation that they will not tolerate authoritarianism. They will continuously rise up. So I can't tell you what's going to happen, but there's room for optimism just because of what we know about modern Iranian history. But I would like to also say, as a historian of the modern Middle East, and with all respect to Ms. Makarami, I would say that there's also optimism in the region. I know that there is a lot of diplomacy happening now, and I know this angers a lot of people because they want to see the Iranian government isolated, but the reconciliation between Iran and Saudi Arabia is more or less ending the war in Yemen, and this whole region has been torn asunder for so long now that all the diplomatic breakthroughs are de-escalating it. And whether we like it or not, that's an important step forward, and it's good for the region as a whole.
Indeed. Shura, just so you know, nodding away as you were saying that. Do you want to come back to what he was saying?
Yes, no, I agree. I mean, I agree in the sense that we don't know which path change will take. And this is something that history, I think, taught us. You know, when you look at the French Revolution, for instance, then there was terror, there was Napoleon, etc., and Napoleon III, and then the Third Republic, you know, more than 100 years afterwards, brought, you know, the kind of democratic republic that we're living now under. So it takes time, and we never know the path because the Third Republic was established by the people who killed the Commune. So you know, it's and I know, and going back to that collective wisdom, I know that now what is happening is that this Iranian movement for change will take every path it can. And it will take every path that it can safely take as well, because two things have changed. You know, in the 79 revolution, we were living in the ideology of martyrdom, and this ideology of martyrdom was that of the revolution of the Islamic Republic, but also that of the revolutionaries, all the revolutionaries from the left and from the Islamists. And now we value life, you know, women life, freedom, and this is a great change of values. And the fact that every life is important is something at every stage of society that has infused Iranian society, and it was not like that for a long time. So we see a secularization of the values of society that is at such a scale that the Islamic Republic is not only losing, you know, its social base with all the poorer classes who were the kind of the clients of the regime they are no longer clients of the regime because they don't have any redistribution of wealth, and now they want regime change as well. But it's also, there is a change of values that is very wide. And so we have all the columns that were holding, you know, the legitimacy of that state, that it's like a geological, you know, change. So the soil has shifted under the feet of this government.
Sure, thank you very much indeed. We need to leave it there. We're out of time. Shura Makarami, thank you for joining us. Thank you to Barbad Golshiri here in the studio. Thanks to our guests joining us from afar, Pooya Ali Magam in California and Tara Kangalu. Sorry I couldn't get back to your final comment there, Tara, but thank you very much as always for joining us. Our thoughts are with the two journalists, Niloufar Hamedi and Ella Homedi, who are basically on trial for telling the truth. Thank you very much indeed for adding that one. Very important to not to forget others. There are more, of course, but of course we will keep across all developments as we can. This is The Debate on France 24. Do stay with us. Thank you.